The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos limped slowly down the main corridor of the medical facility. Her left leg bore the weight of recent surgery, and every step sent a sharp reminder of the improvised explosive device that had changed her life 3 weeks ago in Afghanistan. The metal brace around her knee gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and her military-issued cane clicked rhythmically against the polished floor. Maria had served 8 years in the Marine Corps, earning respect through dedication, courage, and an unwavering commitment to her fellow service members. She had led her squad through some of the most dangerous missions in hostile territory, always bringing everyone home safely. Her chest displayed ribbons that told stories of valor, sacrifice, and leadership that most people could only imagine. The Purple Heart was the newest addition, a medal she never wanted but had earned through blood and pain. As she made her way toward the rehabilitation center for her daily physical therapy session, Maria noticed a group of young recruits gathered near the entrance to the main training facility. They were fresh-faced kids, probably no more than 18 or 19 years old, still adjusting to military life and trying to prove their toughness to each other. Their uniforms were crisp and new, their boots polished to perfection, and their attitudes still carried the cockiness that came before real experience taught humility. The recruits were talking loudly among themselves, their voices carrying across the courtyard with the kind of bravado that masked inexperience. As Maria approached, she could hear snippets of their conversation, and her heart sank as she realized they were making jokes about wounded veterans. One particularly loud recruit, a tall kid with sandy hair and a smirk that needed adjusting, was mimicking the walk of someone using a cane, exaggerating the limp while his friends laughed. Maria felt a familiar fire building in her chest, the same feeling she had experienced when facing enemy fire or protecting her squad from danger. But this was different. This was personal, and it cut deeper than any physical wound. She had given everything for her country, had bled for the freedom these kids took for granted, and now they were treating her sacrifice as entertainment. The sandy-haired recruit noticed Maria approaching and nudged his friends, pointing in her direction with a grin that made her stomach turn. "Look at this one," he said loudly enough for her to hear. "Another broken toy from the sandbox. Bet she's just looking for sympathy and an easy ride through the system." His friends snickered, and one of them added, "Yeah, probably got hurt filing paperwork or something. Half these women soldiers never see real action anyway. Just want the benefits without doing the real work." Maria stopped walking, her knuckles white around the handle of her cane. Every instinct screamed at her to march over there and educate these kids about respect, about sacrifice, about what it really meant to serve. She could feel her face flushing with anger, her heart pounding with the same intensity she had felt during combat. But she also knew that engaging with them would only make things worse, and she was tired, both physically and emotionally. Instead, she took a deep breath and continued walking, her head held high despite the pain shooting through her leg with each step. The recruits' laughter followed her, their crude comments about women in combat and wounded warriors echoing off the buildings around them. Maria bit her tongue so hard she tasted blood, forcing herself to focus on putting one foot in front of the other. As she reached the entrance to the medical facility, Maria heard one final comment that stopped her cold. The sandy-haired recruit, emboldened by his audience, raised his voice and said, "Hey, lady, maybe you should have stayed in the kitchen where you belong. Might have saved yourself a trip to the doctor." The laughter that erupted from his friends felt like a slap across Maria's face. She stood frozen in the doorway, her entire body trembling with rage and hurt. 8 years of service, countless missions, wounded comrades she had carried to safety, and this is how these kids saw her. This is what she had sacrificed for. Maria turned around slowly, looking back at the group of recruits who were still enjoying their joke. She memorized their faces, particularly the sandy-haired ringleader who seemed so proud of his wit. She wanted to say something, to put them in their place, to make them understand the weight of their words. But instead, she simply shook her head and walked into the building, leaving the sound of their mockery behind her. Inside the medical facility, Maria found a quiet corner where she could collect herself before her therapy appointment. She sat down heavily in a chair, her leg throbbing and her heart aching from something much deeper than physical pain. She thought about all the Marines she had served with, good men and women who would never tolerate such disrespect. She thought about the friends she had lost, the ones who would never come home to face the ignorance and ingratitude of people like those recruits. As she sat there, Maria noticed she wasn't alone in the waiting area. A few other wounded veterans were scattered around the room, each dealing with their own challenges and recoveries. There was an Army sergeant missing his left arm, a Navy corpsman in a wheelchair, and an Air Force lieutenant with visible scars across half his face. They were all heroes in their own right, all deserving of respect and dignity. The irony wasn't lost on Maria. Here she was, surrounded by warriors who had given everything for their country, while outside, a group of untested recruits made jokes about their sacrifices. She wondered if those kids had any idea what real courage looked like, what it meant to face death for something bigger than yourself, what it cost to come home broken but not beaten. As Maria prepared for her therapy session, she made a mental note of the incident. She wasn't sure what she would do about it, if anything, but she knew she wouldn't forget. Those recruits needed to learn a lesson about respect, about the true meaning of service, and about the consequences of disrespecting those who had paid the price for their freedom. She just didn't know yet how that lesson would be delivered. 3 days had passed since the incident with the recruits, and Maria was making her way back from another grueling physical therapy session. Her leg was getting stronger each day, but the emotional wound from the disrespectful comments still burned fresh in her memory. She had tried to push the incident aside, focusing on her recovery and rehabilitation, but the faces of those laughing recruits kept haunting her thoughts. As she walked through the base, Maria noticed unusual activity near the administrative buildings. Several black SUVs were parked in front of the command center, and she could see military personnel moving with the kind of purposeful urgency that suggested something important was happening. Her curiosity piqued. She decided to take a slight detour to see what was going on. Near the entrance to the command building, Maria spotted a group of men in desert camouflage uniforms that immediately caught her attention. Even from a distance, something about their bearing, their confidence, and the way other service members seemed to give them space told her exactly who they were. Navy SEALs. She could recognize them anywhere, having worked alongside Special Operations Forces during her deployments. The SEAL team was clearly on base for some kind of training exercise or briefing. There were 6 of them, all seasoned warriors with the kind of calm intensity that came from years of high-stakes missions. Their leader, a tall man with steel-gray eyes and a weathered face that spoke of countless operations, was reviewing documents with a base commander. As Maria continued her walk, she noticed the same group of recruits from a few days earlier gathered near the obstacle course. The sandy-haired ringleader was once again holding court with his friends, and their loud voices carried across the training area. This time, they seemed to be bragging about their own toughness and making disparaging comments about Special Operations Forces. "Those SEAL guys think they're so tough," the sandy-haired recruit was saying to his circle of admirers. "Bet half of them never saw real combat. Just a bunch of glory seekers who get all the credit while regular soldiers do the real work. I could probably outshoot any of them if I got the chance." His friends nodded along, caught up in his bravado and apparently believing every word. Another recruit chimed in. "Yeah, and they probably get special treatment because they're famous. Must be nice to have it easy while the rest of us do the hard training." Maria felt her jaw clench as she listened to their ignorant comments. These kids clearly had no idea what SEALs went through, what kind of training they endured, or what they sacrificed in service to their country. The disrespect was staggering, and it seemed to be a pattern with this particular group of recruits. What happened next would later be described by witnesses as either incredibly unfortunate timing or poetic justice, depending on their perspective. The SEAL team, having finished their briefing, was walking across the training area toward their vehicles when they passed close enough to the recruits to overhear the conversation. The team leader, Commander Jake Morrison, had been a SEAL for 15 years and had deployed to some of the most dangerous places on Earth. He had lost friends, been wounded multiple times, and had earned more commendations than most people could count. He was not the kind of man who took kindly to disrespect, especially from untested recruits who had never faced anything more dangerous than a training exercise. Commander Morrison stopped walking and turned toward the group of recruits, his steel-gray eyes locking onto the sandy-haired kid who had been doing most of the talking. The other SEALs noticed their leader's change in direction and followed suit, creating an imposing semicircle around the suddenly quiet group of young soldiers. "Did I hear you correctly, recruit?" Commander Morrison asked, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made hardened warriors straighten their spines. "Did you just say that SEALs get special treatment and avoid real combat?" The sandy-haired recruit's face went pale as he realized who was standing in front of him. His earlier bravado evaporated instantly, replaced by the kind of terror that comes from knowing you've made a catastrophic mistake. The other recruits seemed to shrink into themselves, suddenly very interested in studying their boots. No, sir, I was just—" the recruit stammered. But Commander Morrison cut him off with a raised hand. "What's your name, son?" the commander asked. "Recruit Thompson, sir," the kid managed to get out, his voice barely above a whisper. "Well, Recruit Thompson, it seems you have some strong opinions about military service and who deserves respect," Morrison said, his tone remaining calm but carrying an underlying steel that made everyone within earshot nervous. "Tell me, how much combat experience do you have?" Thompson's face went from pale to bright red. "None, sir. I just started basic training last month." "I see. And in your vast experience of 1 month in the military, you've determined that Special Operations Forces are frauds and that wounded veterans are looking for sympathy?" Morrison's voice grew slightly harder with each word. The recruit's eyes widened in confusion and fear. "Sir, I never said anything about wounded veterans." Commander Morrison's expression darkened. "Oh, but you did. 3 days ago, you and your friends here were making jokes about a wounded Marine, mocking her injury and suggesting she didn't deserve respect because she was a woman. Were you not?" The blood drained from Thompson's face completely. He glanced around at his friends, looking for support, but found only terrified expressions mirroring his own. Word traveled fast on military bases, and it seemed their little display of disrespect had not gone unnoticed. "How do you know about that, sir?" Thompson asked weakly. "Because, recruit, that Marine you were mocking is Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, and she happens to be someone I know very well," Morrison replied, his voice now carrying a dangerous edge. "She served with distinction in my area of operations for 2 years. She saved the lives of 3 of my men during a firefight in Kandahar, carrying them to safety while under heavy fire and despite being wounded herself." The silence that followed was deafening. Thompson and his friends stood frozen, the full weight of their mistake beginning to sink in. They had mocked a genuine war hero, someone who had literally saved lives and earned her wounds in service to others. Commander Morrison continued, his voice cutting through the stunned silence like a blade. "Staff Sergeant Santos earned her Purple Heart and her limp by throwing herself on top of a wounded soldier to shield him from an IED blast. She absorbed shrapnel meant for him, saving his life at the cost of permanent damage to her own leg. That soldier was a Navy SEAL, Recruit Thompson, one of my men." Thompson looked like he was going to be sick. The other recruits seemed to be trying to disappear into the ground. The weight of their actions, the cruelty of their words, was finally hitting them with full force. "The woman you mocked and called a broken toy has more courage in her injured leg than you have in your entire body," Morrison said, stepping closer to Thompson. "She has earned more respect in 8 years of service than you will earn in a lifetime. If you even make it through basic training with that attitude..." One of the other SEALs, a massive man with arms like tree trunks, spoke up for the first time. "Commander, maybe these boys need a lesson in what real training looks like. What do you think?" Morrison smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. "I think that's an excellent idea, Chief. What do you say, recruits? Ready to see what special treatment actually looks like?" What followed became known around the base as the education and would be talked about for years to come. Commander Morrison had spoken with the base commander, who was more than happy to allow the SEALs to conduct an impromptu training session with the disrespectful recruits. Word spread quickly through the base, and soon a small crowd had gathered to watch what was about to unfold. Thompson and his friends found themselves standing at attention in front of the obstacle course, facing 6 of the most elite warriors in the military. The SEALs had changed into their training gear, and their presence was even more intimidating up close. Each man was a perfect specimen of military conditioning, their bodies carved by years of the most demanding training and operations imaginable. "Gentlemen," Commander Morrison announced to the gathered crowd, "these recruits have expressed some interesting opinions about military service, special operations, and wounded veterans. They seem to think that some of us get special treatment, that we avoid real combat, and that wounded warriors are looking for sympathy. Today, we're going to help them understand exactly what kind of special treatment we receive." The crowd murmured appreciatively. Word of the recruits' behavior toward Maria had spread, and there wasn't much sympathy for them among the other service members. Disrespecting wounded veterans was considered one of the lowest things a person could do on a military base. Chief Petty Officer Mike Kowalski, the massive SEAL who had suggested the training session, stepped forward. "First lesson, boys, physical fitness. You think we get it easy? Let's see how you handle a basic SEAL warm-up." What followed was 2 hours of the most intense physical training any of the recruits had ever experienced. They started with a mile run in full gear, followed by hundreds of push-ups, sit-ups, and burpees. The SEALs demonstrated each exercise first, making it look effortless, while the recruits struggled to complete even half the repetitions. Thompson, who had been so confident and mouthy just hours before, was on the ground vomiting after the first 30 minutes. His friends weren't faring much better, their faces red with exhaustion and embarrassment as they struggled to keep up with exercises that the SEALs performed without breaking a sweat. "Having trouble there, Thompson?" Commander Morrison asked as the recruit struggled to complete his 50th push-up. "I thought you said you could outshoot any of us. Hard to shoot when you can't even hold your arms steady, isn't it?" The crowd of watching service members was enjoying the show, but there was an underlying message that everyone understood. This wasn't just about physical punishment. This was about respect, about understanding the sacrifice that real warriors made, and about learning the difference between talking tough and being tough. After the physical training came weapons training. The SEALs set up a complex shooting course that tested not just accuracy, but speed, precision under pressure, and the ability to make split-second decisions. They demonstrated first, moving through the course with fluid grace, their shots perfect even while running, diving, and maneuvering through obstacles. When it was Thompson's turn, his hands were shaking so badly from exhaustion that he could barely hold the weapon steady. His shots went wide, missing targets that the SEALs had hit easily while moving at full speed. The humiliation was complete, and any trace of his earlier arrogance had been thoroughly crushed. But the most important part of the lesson came when Commander Morrison called for a break and had someone special join them. Maria Santos walked onto the training area, moving slowly but with her head held high. She had heard about what was happening and had asked to be part of the educational experience. The crowd fell silent as Maria approached the shooting line. She was still using her cane, her leg clearly causing her pain with each step, but her eyes burned with determination. She took a position at the firing line and nodded to Commander Morrison. "Gentlemen," Morrison announced, "I'd like you to meet the broken toy you were making fun of a few days ago. Staff Sergeant Santos has graciously agreed to demonstrate what 8 years of real military service looks like." Maria raised her weapon and began firing at targets 300 meters away. Despite her injured leg, despite the obvious pain she was experiencing, every shot was perfect. She moved through a complex course of fire that would challenge even experienced marksmen, hitting multiple targets with precision that left the watching crowd speechless. When she finished, the entire group erupted in applause. Maria had just outshot every person on that range while dealing with a significant physical disability. The recruits, who had been so quick to mock her, now stood in stunned silence, finally beginning to understand the true nature of the woman they had disrespected. Commander Morrison walked over to Maria and shook her hand. "Outstanding as always, Staff Sergeant. These recruits were just learning about the difference between earned respect and unearned arrogance." Maria looked directly at Thompson and his friends. Her eyes filled not with anger, but with disappointment. "I didn't come here for an apology," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I came here because I want you to understand something. Every person on this base, every veteran you meet, every wounded warrior you see, has earned their place here through sacrifice you can't even imagine. We don't want your pity, but we do deserve your respect." Thompson, his face streaked with sweat and tears of shame, stepped forward. "Staff Sergeant, we..." He struggled to find words adequate for the magnitude of his mistake. "There's no excuse for what we said. We were wrong, and we're sorry." Maria nodded slowly. "I accept your apology, recruit. But apologizing to me isn't enough. You need to understand that your words have power, that your actions have consequences, and that respect is something you give to others, not something you withhold because you think you're better than them." Commander Morrison addressed the exhausted and humbled recruits one final time. "Gentlemen, today you learned what special treatment actually looks like in the military. We get the privilege of training harder, fighting longer, and sacrificing more than most people ever will. We get the honor of serving alongside warriors like Staff Sergeant Santos, who put their lives on the line for people like you every single day." He paused, letting his words sink in. "You also learned that respect isn't given based on gender, race, or whether someone has been wounded in service. Respect is earned through character, courage, and commitment to something bigger than yourself. Staff Sergeant Santos has earned more respect than you could accumulate in a dozen lifetimes." The crowd began to disperse as the lesson concluded, but the impact would last much longer. Thompson and his friends had received an education that would stay with them for the rest of their military careers. They had learned the difference between talking tough and being tough, between thinking you deserve respect and actually earning it. In the weeks that followed, the story of what happened that day spread throughout the base and beyond. Thompson and his friends completed their basic training with a completely different attitude, showing respect to every service member they encountered, and working twice as hard to prove they understood the lessons they had learned. Maria continued her rehabilitation and eventually returned to limited duty, her reputation enhanced rather than diminished by the incident. The base commander used the story as a teaching tool for incoming recruits, emphasizing the importance of respect, humility, and understanding the true cost of military service. Commander Morrison and his SEAL team completed their training mission and departed, but not before ensuring that every person on that base understood that disrespecting wounded veterans would never be tolerated. The message was clear. In the military, you take care of your own. You respect those who have sacrificed, and you never let ignorance and arrogance go unchecked. The incident became a powerful reminder that true strength comes not from putting others down, but from lifting them up. that real warriors protect those who have already given their all, and that respect, once lost through ignorance, can only be regained through genuine understanding and changed behavior. Thompson learned that lesson the hard way, but he learned it well, and he never forgot it.